It was the middle of the night, the kind of quiet that presses against the walls and the floor, leaving only the hum of equipment and the faint echo of a heartbeat. In a dimly lit studio, one man sat alone, headphones clamped over his ears, eyes closed, and a single breath trapped somewhere between fear, frustration, and obsession. Michael Jackson, king of pop, the man whose name alone could fill arenas, whose every note had captivated the world, was replaying the same line, the same breath, over and over. For 3 days, not to get the lyrics right, not to hit the pitch, not even to perform a complex dance routine. No, he was obsessed with a single, fleeting inhalation, a breath that might last less than a second, but could carry the weight of a lifetime. Why? What could possibly make a man who had conquered every stage, broken every record, and rewritten the rules of pop music obsess over something so small? Was it madness? Was it genius? Or was it something far more profound, a secret of artistry that the world had never understood? This was not mere perfectionism. This was an almost supernatural pursuit of emotion, a quest to capture the invisible essence of sound that could make a listener lean in, hold their breath, and feel something they could never explain. It was the breath that might make the difference between a song that entertained and a song that haunted forever. And yet, outside the studio, the world continued to spin, unaware that the fate of music history was being rewritten in fractions of a second. Engineers whispered, exhausted from hours of repetition. Producers sighed, fearing delays, deadlines, and the impossible standards of a man who would not settle for good enough. The tension was electric. Every exhale, every pause, every imperfection mattered. One wrong moment could undo the magic he was chasing. And the question that lingered in the shadows, one that would drive him to the edge of exhaustion and brilliance, was this: could the invisible act of a single breath create something that would last forever? By the end of this story, you will understand the obsession, the method, and the myth behind that one breath. You will see how a moment no longer than a heartbeat became the lifeblood of a song that defined a generation. And perhaps, like the engineers who endured, you will wonder, was it the breath itself or the mind of the man behind it that made all the difference? The night the recording began, the studio was a sanctuary and a battlefield all at once. Michael arrived with his notebooks, scribbled lyrics, and an intensity that seemed almost palpable, as if the walls themselves could feel the pressure of his presence. No detail was too small, no moment insignificant. Every sound, every microsecond, had meaning. He sat at the microphone and whispered the line, his voice trembling just enough to remind everyone that this was not mechanical, not rehearsed, not artificial. It was alive. He listened, paused, adjusted, and listened again. The engineers could see the frustration in his eyes, an almost imperceptible twitch, the slightest shake of a shoulder. But they also saw a brilliance that defied explanation. "Not right," he would murmur. Again, from the breath, and they would obey. Rewind, replay, reset. For hours, for days. It was not the lyrics, the melody, or the rhythm that demanded such obsession. It was the pause, the gap in the sound where a breath entered, where life itself seemed to hang in suspension. In that instant, Michael was not just performing a song. He was conducting emotion, sculpting air, and shaping the invisible in a way that most people could never even perceive. For Michael, music was not merely heard. It was felt. It was inhaled. And the breath. The breath was the thread connecting the artist to the audience, the invisible cord that could pull someone into the story he was telling. A single, imperfect inhalation could shatter the illusion. A perfect one could transport the listener somewhere entirely new. The team watched, half in awe, half in terror, as he repeated the phrase over and over, sometimes silently mouthing the words, sometimes collapsing into the chair in exhaustion, only to sit up and demand it again. The line between brilliance and obsession blurred with every take, and yet, through the tension, a subtle thrill built. The engineers knew that if anyone could make a single breath matter, it was Michael Jackson. The question was, how far would he go to reach the impossible? And would the world ever truly hear it? Or would it remain a secret, buried in hours of tape and the quiet echoes of a man chasing perfection. To an untrained ear, a breath is a breath. A pause between words, a tiny sigh. But to a vocalist like Michael, it is the single most powerful instrument in a song. Breath carries tension, expectation, emotion. It is the invisible cue that tells a listener, without a word, that something is about to happen, that something matters. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. The air is still. You hold your breath. In that suspended moment, the world sharpens. Every sound is amplified, every heartbeat visible. That is the power Michael sought to capture in 3 days of obsessive repetition. Vocal coaches would later describe it as micro-expression in sound. A slight hesitation before a word can evoke longing. A sudden intake can convey shock. A careful release can create intimacy. And one wrong inhale, or one breath too casual, can destroy the illusion entirely. Michael understood this instinctively. For him, the song was not a vehicle for fame. It was a living organism. The breath was the heartbeat. Every note, every phrasing, every subtle shift in timing depended on that fragile act of inhalation. Engineers and producers might tweak the pitch, adjust the equalization, and manipulate the recording endlessly, but none of their tools could replace the human nuance of Michael's breath. It is said that some of the greatest singers in history spend years perfecting their technique, but Michael went further. He didn't just perfect his voice. He perfected the pauses, the silences, and the very air around him. He chased a sound that existed only in the mind, a fleeting moment of pure emotional resonance that, once captured, could define a song for generations. The question, then, was this: could a single breath truly make the difference between a song that is good and a song that is unforgettable? Could listeners, unaware of the struggle behind the scenes, feel the invisible tension, the heartbeat that Michael had engineered? And this is where the story deepens. Because as perfect as Michael's technique was, the human element, the fragility, the emotion, the risk of failure, was always present. Every inhale carried the weight of uncertainty. Every exhale was a gamble. And as the days stretched on, that small, invisible act, the simple act of breathing, became a battleground between exhaustion, artistry, and something approaching the divine. By the end of this section, the seed of obsession has been planted, and the tension builds. You can already sense it. This is not just a song. This is a journey into the mind of a man who would risk everything for a single, perfect moment. And the question lingers in the air, waiting for the answer in the next stage of the story. Will that breath ever truly be perfect, or is perfection something that exists only in pursuit? The studio was more than just a room with microphones and soundboards. For Michael Jackson, it was a theater of obsession, a proving ground where genius and madness danced on the edge of exhaustion. Those who worked with him often described it as electrifying, terrifying, and utterly mesmerizing, all at once. Take Bruce Swedian, his longtime engineer. He once recounted nights when Michael would insist on replaying a single line hundreds of times, not to perfect the melody, not to polish the performance, but to find the precise moment when a breath could carry the weight of emotion. Swedian recalled one evening when, after hours of repetition, Michael flopped onto the couch, sweat-soaked, and whispered, "It's still not right. I need to feel it. I need to hear the truth in the pause." Truth, that was the word Michael used. He didn't chase perfection for perfection's sake. He chased truth, the raw, vulnerable pulse of human emotion, captured in a fraction of a second. And in the studio, everyone else had no choice but to follow him into that obsession, whether they were engineers, producers, or session musicians. It wasn't always smooth. Some nights tempers flared. Engineers groaned under the pressure of endless playback, while Michael hovered at the microphone, intense and unyielding. Yet even in moments of near breakdown, there was a strange reverence. Everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. A man was bending sound to his will, shaping air into emotion, stretching a single breath into something almost mythical. And there were moments that defied explanation. Stories circulated of Michael stopping mid-take, pointing to a single word or pause, demanding a subtle change, a fraction of an octave, a microsecond of silence. He could hear what no one else could, detect what no machine could measure. And then, when the moment finally aligned with his vision, he would nod, almost imperceptibly, and the room would exhale, sharing a silent acknowledgement of the miracle they had just witnessed. The stakes were high. Deadlines loomed. Albums were on the line. But Michael did not compromise. To him, a song without the correct breath, without the right nuance, was incomplete, a betrayal of the music itself. And this relentless pursuit created a tension that was palpable, almost suffocating. Yet beneath the tension was fascination. Everyone in that room understood that this was not just work. This was history being made, one breath at a time. The question hung in the air. Could anyone else in the world feel what Michael could feel? And if they couldn't, would the song resonate the same way with millions of listeners? Even the smallest, most unnoticeable sound carried weight. A subtle gasp before a phrase, a hesitation at the end of a note. These were not mistakes. They were deliberate, meticulously crafted decisions. And every choice held the potential to transform a good song into an unforgettable masterpiece. By the end of Section 3, the tension peaks. Michael's obsession has been fully revealed, but the outcome is still uncertain. The audience is left wondering, after all the repetition, the sweat, the exhaustion, will this one breath finally achieve the perfection he seeks? Or will the obsession push him further into a relentless cycle with no resolution? The stakes were not just technical, they were profoundly emotional. Every line Michael sang, every phrase he breathed carried more than notes and lyrics. It carried his soul. It carried stories of joy, pain, longing, and triumph. And it carried an invisible weight, the expectation that millions of listeners would feel something they could never articulate, something that would leave them breathless, not just entertained. Michael understood something that many artists overlook. Music is an emotional currency. And the smallest gestures, the slightest intakes of air, the almost imperceptible hesitation can tip the balance between a song that touches hearts and one that merely fills space. The breath, fleeting as it is, becomes the vessel through which listeners connect with the artist's inner world. Imagine for a moment a song you've heard hundreds of times. Perhaps it makes you smile or shiver or remember a lost moment. Now imagine that the emotional power of that song hinges on a single fraction of a second, a tiny, precise breath that most of the world will never consciously notice. That was the gamble Michael was taking. His focus was absolute. While other artists might chase hooks, beats, or chart positions, Michael chased feeling. Every note had to resonate truth. Every breath had to vibrate with authenticity. And the pressure to achieve this level of emotional precision was relentless. For 3 days he lived in that tension, riding a narrow ridge between exhaustion and transcendence. But what made this obsession particularly remarkable was its universality. Michael didn't just want listeners to hear the breath. He wanted them to feel it, to understand it intuitively. The challenge was immense. How could a single inhalation, barely perceptible, hidden in the fabric of a song, convey the depth of emotion he imagined? And could that tiny act truly anchor the emotional journey of an entire track? There were moments when the weight of expectation nearly broke him. Hours stretched into nights, nights into days, and yet he pressed on, driven not by fame or money, but by a desire to create a perfect moment of human connection. And that is what made the pursuit heroic and terrifying. The emotional stakes were immense. If the breath failed, the song would fail. If the breath succeeded, history would remember it forever. This is where the drama deepens. The audience now realizes that what seems like a small, almost invisible act, a single breath, carries the weight of an entire legacy. Every listener, from a child hearing it for the first time to a lifelong fan revisiting it decades later, will experience the result of this obsession. And yet no one outside the studio may ever know the struggle, the sweat, the intensity required to achieve it. By the end of Section 4, the tension reaches a tipping point. The audience feels the weight of Michael's emotional journey. The question lingers like a held breath. Will the song carry the resonance he envisioned? Will the one perfect inhalation transcend technique and touch the hearts of millions? And perhaps most hauntingly, what price must a genius pay to capture such fleeting perfection? The line between perfection and obsession is thin, and Michael Jackson walked it as if on a tightrope over an abyss. For most artists, a song could be released, a note slightly off-pitch forgiven, a breath unnoticed, but not for Michael. For him, every microsecond mattered, every nuance mattered, and every inhale carried the weight of judgment, not from critics or audiences, but from himself. Perfection was not a goal. It was a necessity. And obsession was the cost. Engineers recalled sitting through hours, sometimes days, of relentless repetition. It's just a breath, they would think. But to Michael, it was the difference between magic and mediocrity, between a song that would be forgotten and one that would echo for generations. And yet, there was a fragile beauty in this madness. Obsession is often demonized, but in Michael's case, it was a conduit to something transcendent. Every correction, every pause, every whispered demand was aimed at capturing a truth so delicate it could barely be measured, but once heard could never be forgotten. He compared himself to the greats, Mozart, Beethoven, Da Vinci. All of them had spent lifetimes chasing detail, obsessing over lines, chords, or brushstrokes. Genius, he seemed to understand, was inseparable from obsession. But obsession also demanded sacrifice. Sleep disappeared. Patience frayed. Even those closest to him felt the strain. There were nights when exhaustion brought him to the brink of collapse. Yet he would rise and demand one more take, one more breath, one more chance to touch perfection. And with each attempt, the tension in the room grew. Engineers and producers became silent witnesses to a ritual that seemed both sacred and insane. The question everyone asked but no one dared voice aloud was this: was Michael chasing perfection, or was he chasing something unattainable, a ghost that would always elude him? And if it eluded him, would the song ever achieve the emotional impact he imagined? But even in those moments of doubt, there was undeniable brilliance. His obsession shaped the sound, gave the song life, and created a signature that no ordinary artist could replicate. It was the tension between obsession and artistry that fueled every note, every pause, every breath. By the end of this section, the audience senses the stakes have never been higher. Perfection is within reach, but at what cost? And the looming question remains, will the pursuit of brilliance become triumph, or will obsession consume the very soul trying to capture it? Michael Jackson was often portrayed as flawless, effortless, almost superhuman. Fans saw magic, graceful moves, perfect vocals, and unshakable presence. But behind the myth was a reality that few could imagine: relentless labor, repeated takes, obsessive scrutiny, and moments of near despair. Every legendary performance, every iconic recording had been forged in the crucible of sweat, repetition, and painstaking attention to detail. The public never saw the hours spent obsessing over a single breath, the endless fine-tuning of microseconds of sound, the sleepless nights dedicated to creating an imperceptible moment of perfection. Engineers and collaborators often described it as walking a razor's edge between awe and terror. One wrong word, one misplaced note, one breath too casual, and the illusion would shatter. Michael knew this, and he refused to compromise. For him, artistry was not about convenience. It was about truth, authenticity, and emotional resonance. Myths suggest that genius comes effortlessly, that talent alone is enough to reach iconic status. Michael Jackson shattered that myth repeatedly. His brilliance was inseparable from obsession. The magic we hear in his music, the soaring vocals, the perfect phrasing, the emotional nuance, was not accidental. It was meticulously crafted, often at immense personal cost. The breath that had consumed 3 days of his life was emblematic of this truth. To the listener, it might seem like a simple, fleeting moment, but to Michael, it was the heartbeat of the song. Without it, the song could not exist as he envisioned. The myth of effortless genius crumbled in the face of reality. Every note was earned, every pause intentional, and every breath a battleground between human limitation and artistic ambition. And yet, the myth persists because the results are breathtaking. We hear a flawless performance, unaware of the unseen struggle behind it. But once you know the story, the obsession, the repetition, the sacrifice, you cannot listen the same way again. The tiniest inhalation carries weight, depth, and intent that most audiences cannot consciously detect, but can instinctively feel. Michael's story challenges everything we assume about talent and artistry. The greatest artists are not born with magic. They cultivate it through obsession, dedication, and a willingness to endure discomfort in pursuit of something that cannot be measured. And for Michael, that something often came down to a single, invisible breath. As this section closes, the tension rises. The audience is left in awe of the labor behind legend. And the story asks a haunting question. If the world hears only the perfection, will they ever understand the obsession? And more importantly, will Michael ever find satisfaction? Or will the pursuit of brilliance always demand more than any human can give? For most listeners, a song is complete the moment it reaches their ears. But for the engineers working alongside Michael Jackson, the process was a battlefield, a test of endurance, and a masterclass in obsession. To them, every breath, every pause, every imperceptible sound mattered more than they could have imagined. Bruce Swedian, Michael's longtime collaborator, described nights when the artist would demand repeated takes, sometimes hundreds, to capture a single fraction of a second, a breath that could make a listener feel suspense, vulnerability, or intimacy without a single word being sung. You think it's just music? Swedian would say later. But it's not. It's invisible emotion, trapped in sound, waiting to be released at exactly the right moment. The technical challenges were immense. Microphones could pick up unwanted noise. Compressors could slightly alter dynamics. Even a minor variation in timing could shift the emotional impact entirely. And yet, for Michael, no machine, no technology could replace the human nuance of that perfect breath. It had to be alive. It had to be real. Engineers recall a tension in the studio that was almost palpable. One wrong inhale, one slight hesitation, and the magic would dissipate. Hours of work, meticulous monitoring, constant recalibration, all revolved around capturing the ephemeral essence of a single sound. And yet, even amid the exhaustion, there was a thrill. There was the knowledge that what they were capturing could become legendary. The stakes were enormous, but so was the artistry. Michael's attention to detail forced engineers to see the invisible, to anticipate emotion, and to manipulate sound not just technically but emotionally. Every decision had weight, every adjustment mattered, and the one breath that had consumed him for 3 days became the fulcrum upon which the emotional power of the entire song rested. The tension reached its peak when a take almost failed. A slight imperfection in the breath could have undone hours of work, potentially compromising the song's emotional integrity. But Michael refused to compromise. He demanded the impossible, and then when it was finally achieved, the engineers understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. By the end of this section, the audience senses the delicate balance. Technology meets obsession, human limits push against genius, and one imperceptible breath carries the weight of millions of emotions. The question remains, could such meticulous labor truly be felt by listeners who would never know the struggle behind the sound? And if so, how would it change the way we understand music? The power of a single breath may seem inconsequential, almost invisible, but in Michael Jackson's hands, it became monumental. Music history is filled with iconic moments, one note, one phrase, one sound that reverberates across generations. Yet few have understood that these moments often hinge on choices that most of the world will never notice. Michael's painstaking focus on a single inhalation demonstrates this principle vividly. That brief pause, that precise intake of air, would determine whether the song carried intimacy, tension, or vulnerability. It would dictate whether millions of listeners felt a shiver of anticipation, a heartbeat of connection, or the haunting presence of emotion they couldn't explain. Pop culture, in particular, thrives on these invisible moments. We remember the melodies, the hooks, the dances, but rarely the subtle micro-details that give them life. Michael understood that a fleeting gesture, almost imperceptible to the untrained ear, could resonate with millions. That one breath wasn't just a technical decision, it was the emotional fulcrum of a song that would echo through decades, and the impact extends beyond music. Think of the countless artists inspired by him who would spend years studying his phrasing, his timing, his approach to breathing. Every micro-choice became a lesson in emotional authenticity. That one breath, painstakingly perfected, became part of a blueprint that countless performers would study, imitate, and admire. The cultural significance is profound. Michael's dedication transformed how pop music could be understood, not merely as entertainment, but as an immersive, emotional experience. It wasn't about charts or accolades, it was about resonance, about creating a moment that could change the listener's perception, even subconsciously, yet the breath's subtlety ensures it remains invisible to most. Few will ever know the hours spent, the near madness endured, the perfection demanded. And that's precisely the point. True artistry often hides in the details no one sees, in moments that seem trivial but carry immense weight. Michael's breath was invisible magic, a testament to the hidden labor behind legend. As Section 8 closes, the audience is left with a lingering sense of awe and tension. A single fraction of a second, a breath, has defined an entire cultural phenomenon, and the question that hangs in the air is as haunting as it is inspiring. How many masterpieces, how many transformative moments are shaped by details that the world will never notice? And if Michael had not obsessed over that one breath, would the song and perhaps even pop culture itself have felt different? The stage is now set for the climax, the moment when all obsession, tension, and artistry collide, revealing the ultimate truth about what that single breath achieved and why it mattered more than anyone could have imagined. After 3 days of relentless pursuit, the studio air was thick with exhaustion and anticipation. Michael Jackson, his body tense and his mind sharp despite fatigue, sat once again before the microphone. The engineers, who had become both witnesses and accomplices in this obsessive ritual, held their breath as he inhaled, poised to perform what had become a near-mythic act. The perfect breath. This was no ordinary take. Every second, every vibration of air, every subtle fluctuation in timing mattered more than words could describe. For Michael, the song's emotional heartbeat depended on this moment. A fraction of a misstep, a slight hesitation, and the song's magic would vanish, leaving nothing but hours of labor and frustration. He closed his eyes. The silence was absolute, except for the hum of the equipment and the quiet anticipation of those around him. Michael inhaled, not just for the song, but as if drawing the weight of emotion itself into his lungs. The room seemed to suspend in time. One breath, a tiny fraction of a second, yet carrying the cumulative tension of days. The unrelenting obsession of a perfectionist, and the invisible labor of artistry itself. The sound engineers, accustomed to his demands, felt it too. The pause was electric, a delicate tremor in the air. Then the exhale, the delivery, was flawless. Perfect in timing, perfect in emotion, perfect in resonance. The tiny, almost imperceptible breath became a vessel of human vulnerability, intimacy, and connection. It was as if the song itself had finally found its soul. Michael's eyes opened, a mixture of relief and triumph crossing his face. It was over, and yet it had only just begun. That single breath, the one that had consumed days of his life, had transformed the song into something transcendent, elevating it from entertainment to legend. This was the invisible heartbeat of pop music history, a moment no one outside the studio would ever fully perceive. Yet its impact would ripple across the world, touching millions, shaping emotions, and defining the cultural landscape for decades. The engineers exhaled collectively, knowing they had been part of something extraordinary. And yet, even in triumph, the tension lingered. Michael's pursuit of perfection was insatiable. One moment of brilliance did not satisfy him for long. It only opened the door to the next challenge, the next nuance to explore. This is the paradox of genius. The closer you approach perfection, the more acutely aware you become of the infinite gaps that remain. The question remained: would listeners ever consciously recognize the meticulous labor, the obsession and the obsession-driven artistry behind that single breath? Perhaps not. But the true power of Michael's genius was that recognition was irrelevant. The emotional resonance, the invisible heartbeat, was enough. It would seep into the listener's experience, unspoken, unseen, yet profoundly felt. By the end of the climax, the audience understands the stakes, the obsession, and the triumph. The single breath has been perfected, and the song has been transformed. The lingering cliffhanger is philosophical. Perfection has been achieved, but at what cost? And what does it mean to chase a moment that is both ephemeral and eternal? In the quiet aftermath, the studio felt almost sacred. The lights dimmed, the equipment humming softly as if acknowledging the achievement. Michael Jackson, exhausted yet serene, understood what had been accomplished. That single breath, so small, so fleeting, yet so vital, had become the lifeblood of a song that would resonate for generations. To the casual listener, it might pass unnoticed. A subtle intake, a slight pause, a fraction of a second, invisible. Yet it carried everything: emotion, vulnerability, suspense, intimacy, and connection. It was a reminder that the smallest gestures often hold the greatest power. Michael had taught the world, without ever saying a word, that mastery lies not only in the grand and spectacular, but in the invisible details that shape experience. Artists and fans alike would continue to marvel at his work, often unaware of the obsession and labor that brought it to life. The myth of effortless genius persisted, but those who knew, engineers, collaborators, and a few lucky insiders, understood the truth. Brilliance demands sacrifice. Obsession is the fuel, patience is the vessel, and even a single breath can alter the course of history. Michael's perfectionism was more than technical precision. It was a philosophy. Every note, every pause, every tiny breath was a statement about artistry, integrity, and emotional truth. He showed that music is not simply sound, but experience crafted with intention, patience, and relentless pursuit of connection. And for those willing to listen, to feel, to pay attention, the lesson is profound. Greatness is rarely born. It is meticulously built, sometimes at tremendous cost, one careful, deliberate choice at a time. One breath, one phrase, one moment. And sometimes, those infinitesimal moments carry the weight of eternity. As the audience reflects, a lingering sense of awe remains. Michael's story is a testament not only to musical genius, but to human potential. The pursuit of perfection, even in something as small and fleeting as a breath, can create beauty that transcends time, culture, and expectation. It reminds us that every detail matters, that care and obsession are often the hidden forces behind excellence, and that even the invisible can shape the visible world in profound ways. Finally, there is closure. The breath has been perfected. The song lives, and the legacy endures. Listeners everywhere, knowingly or not, experience the subtle magic of a moment that took 3 days to achieve. A single breath that carries decades of dedication, passion, and genius. The ultimate takeaway is clear. Mastery is measured not by what is seen, but by what is felt. And sometimes, the most extraordinary acts are the quietest, the smallest. The invisible details that transform the ordinary into the unforgettable. Michael Jackson's 3-day pursuit of a single breath is more than a story about music. It is a lesson in obsession, artistry, patience, and emotional resonance. It is a reminder that the extraordinary often hides in the most minute gestures, and that human potential, when combined with relentless dedication, can achieve moments of transcendent beauty that endure far beyond a lifetime. And as the story closes, the audience is left with both reflection and awe. The breath is gone, but its impact remains eternal. The song continues to touch hearts, carry emotion, and remind us that even the smallest acts, when performed with devotion and genius, can become legendary.